We all think we know how this world works, right? The sun rises, the sun sets, there are unbreakable laws. But sometimes, we come across stories, dusty case files, that whisper a different truth. A truth that there are cracks in the fabric of reality, and some people have been unlucky enough to step into them. Today, we're not talking about ghosts or ancient legends, we're talking about flesh and blood people. People who were hiking on a familiar trail, in broad daylight, next to their family and friends, and then vanished. Imagine you're there, the fresh mountain air filling your lungs. You turn away for just a second to tie your shoe, and when you look up, the person you were with is gone. Not a scream, not a trace. Just a sudden silence and a cold feeling crawling up your spine. The files we're about to open tonight aren't just missing person cases. They are unsolved riddles, events that challenge every bit of logic we know. We'll go through every detail together, every witness statement, and try to understand what in the hell really happened in those places. Story 1. 50 Yards to Nowhere. The first story in our case file tonight begins with a number. 50. 50 yards. It's not a great distance. You can throw a ball across it. You can walk it in under a minute. For Mark Evans, a 34-year-old man, healthy and full of life, those 50 yards were just a short walk from the warmth of a campfire to the cool of the Nahala River. A chore. A quick trip to get water. Pile on. But it was his last trip. Let's go back together to the evening of June 18th, 2013. Imagine you're there, sitting with Mark's group of friends. The atmosphere is perfect. The smell of pine from the campfire mixes with the damp earth of the North Carolina forest. Laughter, the strumming of a guitar. It's a perfect picture of an ideal camping night. Mark, the organizer of the trip, was always the life of the party. He was full of energy, always knew how to make people feel comfortable. Around 7:30 in the evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Mark noticed they were running low on water. He stood up, grabbed the yellow plastic jug, and said a simple sentence, a sentence millions of people say every day, "I'm gonna get some water." No one thought anything of it. Everyone was still laughing and joking. They watched his silhouette walk towards the short trail leading to the river, a clear path between the trees. Then they turned back to their conversations. They believed that in just a few minutes, Mark would be back, maybe complaining a little about how cold the river water was. They were wrong. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The guitar music started to fade. Someone asked, "What's taking Mark so long?" An uninvited silence began to creep into their warm circle. 15 minutes. Now it wasn't curiosity anymore, but a vague sense of unease. Natalie, Mark's close friend, and Greg, an experienced hiker, decided to go check. They stepped onto the trail, and the air seemed to change instantly. The chill of the descending night felt thick. They called Mark's name. Their voices echoed among the trees, but only their own echoes answered back. A heavy silence, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. When they reached the riverbank, the sight before them made their blood run cold. The yellow plastic jug was there, lying on the damp gravel, empty. Mark was gone. But no, it wasn't just that he was gone. That's too normal a word for what they were witnessing. Try to picture this. You're standing on a riverbank with damp sand. Anyone who walks by would leave footprints, right? But there was nothing. The sand was smooth, pristine, as if no living thing had been there for hours. There were no footprints from Mark walking to the water's edge. There were no footprints of him walking back. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints of a second person. It was as if he never made it there, as if he had vanished into thin air somewhere in the 50-yard space between the camp and the river. Panic erupted like a dry fire. The whole group rushed to search, screaming his name in vain. Their flashlight beams cut erratically through the deepening darkness, only revealing more trees and more silence. Not a scream, not a strange noise, not a single splash from the river. Mark Evans, a man over 6 feet tall, weighing nearly 200 pounds, had disappeared without making a sound. By 9 p.m., hope gave way to horror. They knew this was no longer something they could handle themselves. The 911 call was made, and that's when the story shifted from a personal tragedy to one of the most baffling mysteries local law enforcement had ever faced. At midnight, the sheriff and volunteers arrived. But they didn't come alone. A strange, thick, and cold fog had rolled in from the mountains. The weather forecasters hadn't predicted this. It wasn't like normal fog. It clung to the ground, swallowed the light, distorted space, and made even the most experienced searchers lose their bearings. One person later described it as a veil. The nighttime search yielded no results. The next morning, the experts came in. Divers checked the riverbed. Search teams were systematically organized. And most importantly, K9 units were brought in. This is when the absurdity reached its peak. The dogs, trained to follow the faintest of scents, were given Mark's belongings to smell. They became excited, started to follow the trail. And then, just a few meters from the camp, they stopped abruptly. They circled in confusion, whimpering, looking at their handlers as if asking a silent question. The trail was gone, completely, at a random point in the middle of nowhere. It was as if the ground had opened up, swallowed him, and then closed again without leaving a crack. The search continued, fueled by the desperation of his family and friends. And then, on the second day, they found something. A volunteer, in an area more than a mile downstream, discovered Mark's windbreaker. It was neatly placed on dry ground, inside a thicket. Next to it was a single sock. Both were clean, not torn, almost in perfect condition. But there was a problem, a deeply disturbing problem. That area had been thoroughly searched by at least 2 different teams the day before. They swore on their honor. Those items were not there. Where did they come from? Who or what put them there? And why? It didn't feel like a clue. It felt like a cruel joke, a taunt to their search efforts. When the K9 units were brought to this new location, they failed once again. There was no scent leading to or from the jacket. The next 12 days were a series of futile efforts. Hundreds of people, drones with thermal cameras, helicopters. They turned over every rock, looked in every bush. They found nothing. Not a body, not a scrap of clothing, not a drop of blood. All rational theories collapsed. He didn't commit suicide, he had too much to live for. He didn't run away all his money, and ID were left behind. He wasn't attacked by a wild animal, there were no signs of a struggle. He wasn't kidnapped, no one could do that so silently and perfectly. After 14 days, the Swain County Sheriff, with a tired and defeated look on his face, had to announce the suspension of the active search. Mark Evans' case was officially closed with 3 cold words: missing under unknown circumstances. But for those who were there, for those who felt the strange silence of the forest and that malevolent fog, they knew there was a cause. They just didn't have the words to describe it. The story became a local legend, a tale whispered around other campfires. A warning. They say there are places in this world, places where the veil between our world and another world becomes thin. Places where you can accidentally step through an invisible door. And the final, most terrifying question still hangs there over the Nahala River. In that 50-yard space, what did Mark Evans encounter? What can erase a human being from reality without leaving a trace, without making a sound? And is it still there? Waiting? Story 2. The body on the unclimbable cliff. We often think that a search ends when the missing person is found. No matter how tragic the outcome, at least there's closure. An answer. But the next story in our case file will prove the opposite. Sometimes, finding the body is when the real nightmare begins. Meet Emily White, a 27-year-old woman, and meet Josh Rivers, her boyfriend. Their story begins on a beautiful July day on a hiking trail in Maine. But it doesn't end there. It ends in a place that no one can get to. 3 minutes. That's how long Josh left Emily to run ahead and check a trail sign. He was a careful person. He just wanted to make sure they were on the right path. He told Emily, "I'll be right back." When he returned, she was gone. Try to put yourself in Josh's shoes. Just 3 minutes ago, the person you love was sitting on a rock, smiling at you. Now, only her small snack bag is left there. Her backpack, with her water bottle and phone inside, is still intact. The air around you is terrifyingly silent. You call her name. Your voice gets lost among the trees, with no reply. Josh's initial panic quickly turned into a large-scale search operation. And the story seemed to repeat a chillingly familiar script. K9 units were brought in. They picked up Emily's scent right where she was sitting. And then, after just a few dozen meters, they lost the trail. Completely. As if she had been lifted off the ground. For the next 10 days, hundreds of volunteers and rescue teams scoured the area. They checked every thicket, every ravine, every stream. Helicopters circled overhead, their cameras scanning every open patch of land. But Emily White seemed to have vanished into thin air. Her family and friends were consumed by grief, tormented by an unanswered question. And then, on the 10th day, they got a call. A group of professional climbers was training in a completely different area, a place far from the popular trail Emily and Josh had been on. It was a nearly vertical rock wall, a place you absolutely cannot get to without ropes, hooks, and years of experience. A place no normal hiker could accidentally wander into. And there, on a narrow ledge dangling between heaven and earth, they saw a human figure. When the high-angle rescue team reached the location, their worst fears were confirmed. It was Emily White. Her body was in a strange position, as if she were crouched, leaning her back against the rock wall, facing out into the empty space. Her small backpack lay beside her, its buckle still fastened. Finding her should have brought an end. But no, it only opened up a series of questions so absurd they bordered on madness. The first and most obvious question: how did she get there? The most experienced climbers, the ones who found her, confirmed that there was no way a normal person could have climbed up to that ledge. There was no trail leading to it. There was no way to walk up. It was a death trap suspended in mid-air. Emily was not a climber. She didn't have any gear. So how could she have appeared in a place that even experts needed specialized equipment to reach? Let's consider the possibilities. Maybe she fell from somewhere higher. But the autopsy report immediately extinguished that theory. And this is where the story shifts from a mystery to something surreal. The medical examiner's report, by Dr. Mario Carver, was a document full of terrifying contradictions. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. Listen closely. There were no injuries consistent with a fall from a great height, no broken bones, no crushed internal organs, no severe bruising. Her body was almost completely intact. So if she didn't fall, maybe she was murdered and her body was hidden there? That's a logical theory. Until you read the rest of the report. There were no signs of violence, no stab wounds, no signs of strangulation. There was no foreign DNA on her clothes or body, no toxins or drugs in her blood. Yay, she didn't fall. She wasn't killed. She also didn't commit suicide by jumping from that cliff. So, how did she die? The county sheriff, John Hightower, after reviewing all the evidence, could only admit complete failure. "We can't say this death was violent," he said at a press conference, his voice full of bewilderment. "But we also can't explain how she got there." Let's pause for a moment and reflect on the absurdity of this situation. A woman disappears from an easy hiking trail. 10 days later, she's found dead in an inaccessible place, without any sign of how she got there, and the cause of her death is a blank space. Josh Rivers, her boyfriend, was completely devastated. He had to go through multiple interrogations, even a lie detector test, and they all showed he was completely innocent. He kept telling the police, "I don't understand. She couldn't have been there. Whether accidentally or on purpose, it's impossible." On online forums for mystery lovers, Emily White's story became a legend. People came up with countless theories. Legend. Some suggested she was kidnapped by a psychopath, a person with superhuman climbing skills who took her up there, killed her in a way that left no trace, and then disappeared. But this theory has too many holes. Why go through such a complicated and risky act? And how could he have done everything so perfectly without leaving a single hair, a single fingerprint? Others turned to more bizarre explanations. They talked about portals, anomalous zones where the laws of physics are bent. They suggested that Emily had accidentally stepped into a glitch in reality and was placed in another location, a location that cannot be explained by conventional logic. Whatever you believe, the facts remain unchanged. Emily White died in a place she couldn't have reached, and she died from a cause no one can find. Her story is not a warning about the dangers of nature. It is a warning about the fragility of the reality we live in. It shows that there are forces, laws that we don't understand, operating right beside us. Nimere. And it leaves us with haunting questions. How could Emily have crossed an impossible distance to get to where she died? What happened to her in the 10 days she was missing? And the final, most terrifying question. If a person can be absurdly moved from point A to point B, then who or what is holding the map? Story 3. The Empty Tent and the Storm. We often seek comfort in storms. The warmth of a roof, the safety of 4 walls, or in the case of a hiker, the thin shelter of a tent. We believe that as long as we stay put, the fury of nature will eventually pass. Tom Haley, 34 years old, believed that too. When the dark clouds began to roll over the skies of Virginia, signaling a fierce storm was about to hit the Dragon's Tooth area, he did exactly what an experienced hiker would do. He returned to his tent, secured the guidelines, and prepared to wait it out. The next morning, the storm had passed, but so had Tom Haley. This story doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a strange silence. Imagine you're the Patterson couple. You met Tom the morning before, a friendly, vibrant young man, enjoying his solo trip. You know the storm is coming. The next morning, on your way back down the trail, you decide to stop by and see if he's okay. You see his tent from a distance, still standing amidst a scene of devastation from the storm. Broken branches are scattered everywhere, the ground eroded by streams of rainwater. But the tent, it's still there. A good sign, you think. You get closer. You call his name. Tom, are you in there? No answer. You approach the tent door. The zipper is closed. You feel a bit hesitant, but worry overcomes politeness. You carefully pull the zipper down, and inside, there's no one. The air inside the tent is dry and disturbingly neat. The sleeping bag is laid out, the mat is in place. Everything is in its proper position. Outside, near the dead fire pit, a thermos and a bag of food are still there. And on a small camping table is his cell phone. The screen is dark, but it's there. His wallet, with over $100 in cash and bank cards, is in a compartment of his backpack. His multi-tool knife, his flashlight, all intact. Everything belonging to Tom Haley was there. Dallas. Except for Tom Haley. This scene isn't just strange, it's absurd. It's like a stage set for a play where the main actor has disappeared before the curtain was raised. Who would leave their tent during a fierce storm in the middle of the night while leaving behind everything essential for survival? Phone, wallet, flashlight. The Patterson couple knew immediately that something was wrong. They had to walk several hundred meters to get a cell signal, and the 911 call initiated a search whose results only deepened the mystery. When the first rescue team arrived, they confirmed what the couple had seen. The scene was completely clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a second person. No suspicious footprints around the tent, even though the damp ground after the rain could have easily recorded them. They deployed the K9 units. And once again, we are faced with that chillingly familiar script. The dogs sniffed Tom's belongings. They started to follow a direction, and then, just a few hundred meters from the tent, they stopped. They lost the trail. Completely. Experts suggested that the storm might have washed away all the tracks. That's a reasonable explanation. But it doesn't explain why the trail disappeared at a specific point, and why Tom left the tent in the first place. Tusklanks. The search lasted for weeks. Hundreds of people participated. They used every available technology. Drones flew over the treetops, hoping to spot an unusual color of clothing. Helicopters with thermal cameras scanned the forest, searching for the warmth of a living body. They found nothing. The police considered all possibilities. The criminal theory was almost impossible. Dragon's Tooth is not an easy place to access by car, especially during a storm, and no one among the other campers in the area heard any suspicious noises. The suicide theory was also ruled out. Tom had no history of mental illness. He had a stable job, good friends, and a loving family. His notebook, found in the tent, even recorded detailed plans for the next days of his trip. This was not the act of a person who wanted to end his life. So, what are we left with? We are left with an experienced man who disappeared from a zipped-up tent during a storm without taking anything with him. Let's try to think about Tom Haley's final moments. He's in his tent, listening to the rain pounding on the fabric, the thunder rumbling in the sky. He feels safe. And then something changed. Did he hear a noise? A noise that wasn't from the storm? A voice calling his name from outside? Or did something get into the tent with him? The county sheriff, after weeks of fruitless searching, had to declare that they had exhausted all methods. Tom Haley's case was added to the list of the missing. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. This story has no blood. It has no clear villain. Its horror lies in the silence itself, the silence of the empty tent, the silence of the phone that will never ring again, the silence of an investigation that hit a dead end. It forces us to confront a terrifying question. What can be more powerful than a person's survival instinct? What can make an experienced man leave his only shelter during a storm, without reason, without preparation? Was he lured out by something? An illusion? A promise? Or was he pulled out by something? And the final question, the question that will make you think twice every time you hear the rain on your roof. If a zipped-up tent couldn't protect Tom Haley, then are our four walls really safe? Story 4. The body that appeared after 2 weeks. We usually measure a tragedy by absence. An empty chair at the dinner table, a name no longer called, a silence where laughter used to be. But the next story in our case file is completely different. Its horror does not lie in absence, but in presence. An inexplicable presence. Meet James Carter, 29 years old. He disappeared on the Appalachian Trail on a beautiful May Day. And for 2 weeks, his story seemed to follow a sadly familiar script. But when they found him, all the rules we know about life, death, and time were thrown out the window. This story doesn't ask where did he go. It asks a much more terrifying question. Where was he all that time? Let's go back to May 4th, 2014. James was hiking with 2 close friends, Eric and Matt. They were on a section of the trail in East Tennessee. The air was fresh, the sun was warm, and the spirits of all 3 were high. James, being the fittest, would often walk a little ahead, then stop at scenic spots to wait for his friends. It was a normal routine. Around 10:45 in the morning, Eric and Matt realized they could no longer see James ahead. They thought he might have walked a bit faster or found a good spot for a photo. They sped up. They went around a bend, then another, expecting to see the familiar figure of their friend, but there was no one. They called his name. "James, where are you?" Only the wind answered. Moo! They didn't panic immediately. Maybe he went down a side trail or needed to relieve himself. But as the minutes ticked by in heavy silence, a sense of unease began to creep in. They did what we would do. They called 911, but the signal was spotty. They had to climb to a higher ridge for the call to go through. A search began. And this is where our story starts to enter a strange territory. For the next 2 weeks, a large-scale search operation took place. More than 30 people, including police, rangers, and volunteers, scoured the area. K-9 units were deployed. A Tennessee National Guard helicopter flew overhead, its thermal cameras scanning every square meter of the forest. And once again, we hear that chillingly familiar story. The K-9 units picked up James's trail from the campsite, but then they lost it completely at the exact spot where his friends had last seen him. The GPS signal from his phone also died. At that exact moment, it was as if he had walked off the map of the world. 2 weeks of searching yielded no results, not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not a clue. James's family and friends were consumed by despair. And then, on May 18th, exactly 2 weeks after he disappeared, they found him. A group of volunteers, patrolling a valley about 2 kilometers north of the main trail, discovered the body of a man. The ID in his jeans pocket confirmed his identity. It was James Carter. But this was not an end. This was the beginning of an even bigger mystery. Listen carefully to these details. The volunteer who found James's body swore that he was not there a week before. He said, "It's an almost empty space with sparse trees. There's no way we would have missed a body lying right on the ground. It's absolutely impossible. His statement was confirmed by several other members of the search team. That area had been checked, and checked again. So, where did James's body come from? The strangeness doesn't stop there. Imagine a body lying in the forest for 2 weeks under the May heat in Tennessee, where daytime temperatures can exceed 25 degrees Celsius. What would you expect? Decomposition, right? The effects of insects, of wild animals? But James's body was almost completely intact. The forensic experts were baffled. Its condition was not consistent with being outdoors for 14 days. His clothes were also almost undamaged, with only a small tear on his knee. It was as if he had only recently died. Or his body had been preserved somewhere else before being placed there. And then we come to the autopsy report. A cold document, full of scientific terms, but unable to answer the most basic question. The cause of death? Undetermined. There were no stab or gunshot wounds, no broken bones or serious internal injuries from a fall, no signs of strangulation. The toxicology analysis found no traces of any poisons or drugs in his body. He wasn't murdered. He wasn't in an accident. He didn't commit suicide. So, how did he die? We are facing a series of impossibilities. A man disappears without a trace. 14 days later, his body appears in a thoroughly searched location, in a condition inconsistent with the timeline and with a non-existent cause of death. Let's try to string together the possibilities. Could he have been kidnapped by someone, held for 2 weeks, then killed and his body placed there? This is the most logical theory, until you realize it doesn't explain the cause of death. How can you kill someone without leaving any trace on their body? And why would a kidnapper go through such a complicated act? So if it wasn't a person, then what was it? This story forces us to look at possibilities that mainstream science often dismisses. There are theories about time, windows, places where the past, present, and future can intersect. Could James have accidentally stepped into one of these windows? Did he disappear from our timeline for 2 weeks, but for him, it was perhaps only a few minutes? And when he returned, did the shock of shifting between realities cause his heart to stop? It's a crazy idea, but is it crazier than the facts we have? A fact that his body appeared out of nowhere. A fact that he died without a cause. Chasso, a fact that his backpack and phone were never found. Where did those items go? Were they left behind in another reality? Or were they taken by whatever took him? James Carter's story is not just a missing person case. It is a challenge to our perception of existence. It shows that there may be laws of the universe that we are completely unaware of. Laws of time, space, and even death. And it leaves us with a final question, a question that will follow you into your sleep. If a person can disappear from this world for 2 weeks, and then return as an inexplicable ghost, then when we die, do we really disappear? Or are we simply waiting to be placed back? Story 5. The camera on Dragon's Tooth. In all the stories we've gone through tonight, there's a common thread. The items left behind. An empty plastic jug, a neatly folded jacket, a tent silent in the storm. They are the mute witnesses to an inexplicable disappearance. But this last story revolves around a different kind of item. An item that not only witnessed the disappearance, but perhaps it even recorded it. We're going to talk about Jonathan Clark, a 38-year-old photographer, and his camera. And for a photographer, a camera is more than just a tool. It's a third eye, an extension of the soul. They never put it down carelessly. They never leave it behind. So why did Jonathan's friends find his beloved Canon DSLR camera lying alone on a rock ledge at the very spot where they last saw him? Let's go together to a place with an ominous name, Dragon's Tooth. A mountain range in Virginia, famous for its sharp, jagged rock formations that jut into the sky like the fangs of a prehistoric monster. It's a paradise for photographers. And for Jonathan Clark, it became his tomb. On April 12, 2015, Jonathan and his 2 friends, Paul and Mike, were on the trail leading to the majestic cliffs. Jonathan, as usual, was always slowing down, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape, looking for the perfect shot. He was a careful man, a true artist. Around 1 in the afternoon, as they neared the main viewpoint, Jonathan was almost glowing with excitement. "This place is like it was made for a photographer," he said. He fell back a bit, just behind a bend in the cliff. "You guys go on ahead," he told his friends. "I'll take a few more shots, and then I'll catch up." Those were the last words they heard from him. Paul and Mike went on. They were used to this habit of Jonathan's. They walked for about 10 minutes, then stopped, expecting to hear the sound of their friend's footsteps catching up from behind. But there was only silence. They waited another 5 minutes, then 10. An uncomfortable feeling began to rise. They turned back on the path they had just walked. They went around the bend, and the sight before them made them stop. There was no Jonathan, only his camera, placed neatly on a flat rock just a few steps from the edge of the cliff. It hadn't been dropped, it wasn't damaged, it had been placed, deliberately. Try to imagine the feeling of Paul and Mike at that moment, the confusion, the disbelief, and then the primal fear. They called Jonathan's name. Their calls echoed into the void, then were swallowed by the cliffs. They looked down the abyss below, a chaotic mess of rocks and trees. They saw nothing. They checked around. There were no signs of a slip, no disturbed rocks, not a single scratch on the rock face to indicate a struggle. Jonathan Clark had vanished from the face of the earth. A huge search was launched again. And once again, we are faced with an inexplicable scenario. The most professional climbers rappelled down every nook and cranny of the cliff. They shone flashlights into every crevice, every small cave. They found nothing, not a body, not a scrap of cloth. The K9 units failed once again. Jonathan's scent ended abruptly, right where the camera was placed. It was as if he had flown into the sky or burrowed into the ground. The police seized the camera, hoping it would hold the answer. They checked the memory card, and what they found only made the mystery more ghostly. Most of the pictures were normal, landscapes, his friends walking ahead, but the last photo, it was completely different. It was taken at 1:08 in the afternoon, just a few minutes before his friends came back to look for him. The photo was very strange. It was tilted, capturing only a part of the cliff and a patch of sky. It didn't look like a calculated work of art. It looked like an accidental shot, as if something had bumped into Jonathan's hand, or he had pressed the shutter button in a moment of panic or extreme surprise. The police zoomed in on that photo. They analyzed every pixel. They didn't find any suspicious figures or flying objects. It was just an empty, meaningless photo. Or was it? The logical theories collapsed once again. Jonathan had no reason to commit suicide or run away. He was at the peak of his career, living happily with his girlfriend. The possibility of an attack was also very low. Who could attack and make a man disappear so silently in broad daylight, on a trail, without leaving any trace? And why leave behind the expensive camera? We are left with only absurd possibilities. Let's think about those final moments. Jonathan was standing alone, camera in hand, immersed in the beauty of Dragon's Tooth. He was looking for an angle, and then something caught his attention, something that made him, a careful photographer, put his beloved camera down, something that made him step forward, or backward, and disappear. Some people believe that the last photo was not an accident. They believe it was the last image the camera captured, the moment right before an inexplicable event occurred. Perhaps the thing that took Jonathan was out of frame, or perhaps it was something that a camera lens cannot capture. Dragon's Tooth, with its foreboding name, has witnessed other strange disappearances. The locals whisper strange stories about an anomalous zone where compasses spin wildly and people can disappear. Did Jonathan accidentally step into one of those zones? Or is there a simpler, but no less terrifying explanation that he was not alone on that cliff? That there was a predator there, not an animal, but something else, something that knows how to move without leaving footprints, something that knows how to take a life without making a sound, and it left the camera behind as a trophy, a reminder of its power. Jonathan Clark's story has no end. No body was found. No explanation was given. only a silent camera and a final, haunting photograph. Oof. It forces us to ask. When we look at a photo, we see what was captured. But what is happening just outside the frame? And if you were a photographer standing alone in the wild and you heard a noise behind you, would you turn around or would you keep shooting? 5 stories, 5 voids in reality. A boy disappears in seconds, leaving only his jacket as a ghostly message. A woman is found in an impossible place with a death that has no cause. A man vanishes from a zipped-up tent during a storm. A body reappears after 2 weeks, as if time had been bent, and a photographer leaves only a final, silent photograph. We've gone through these case files together. We've tried to find logic, tried to find a reasonable explanation, but in the end, we're left with only one truth. That is, we know nothing. The world we think we know has dark corners, cracks that science cannot illuminate. Forests are not just trees and earth. Mountains are not just silent rocks. They are living, breathing entities. And sometimes, they demand a price. These stories are not just warnings about hiking. They are reminders that the veil between our world and another world is much thinner than we imagine. That there are ancient laws and primal forces still at work, just beyond our perception. The next time you're walking in a familiar park or driving on a deserted road at night and you get the feeling that you're not alone, when you hear the snap of a twig behind you or see a dark shadow flit by in the corner of your eye, ask yourself, is it really just your imagination? These mysteries have no final answer, but we can speculate together. What do you think? Which case tonight has haunted you the most? Do you have your own theory? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Every opinion is a piece in this endless puzzle. And if you, like us, are drawn to the dark corners of the world, the stories that people don't usually dare to tell, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because our case file still has many unopened pages. Thank you for listening in the dark. Be careful.